Welcome to Pathway to Diagnosis, Genetic Testing for Inherited Retinal Diseases. I am Donna Fishman. I'm the director of the National Center for Children's Vision and Eye Health, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. I am a white woman. I am sitting here in front of a lovely view of Chicago out my window. I'm here at our Prevent Blindness's offices. I have red glasses and brown hair. Thanks so much for being here. I'm going to quickly introduce Prevent Blindness to you. We are the nation's leading eye health and safety organization, and we have several beliefs that really are the backbone to our work. We believe all children should be afforded the benefits of sight as they grow and learn. All adults are educated about proper eye health care and have access to that care, and that necessary attention is provided to issues surrounding the aging eye, and no one needlessly loses their sight due to unsafe practices. So our values are really about equitable access to quality eye care. We are a patient-led organization, and all of our work is evidence-based. We were founded back in 1908, so we've been around a very long time as your nation's eye health and safety organization. The National Center for Children's Vision and Eye Health was initiated back in 2009 to create a public health infrastructure to promote a comprehensive system of vision care and eye health for all children. And so it is the National Center today that is bringing you this webinar on behalf of Prevent Blindness. We have three main goals that guide our work. We convene stakeholders, multiple stakeholders from a lot of different areas between health and education, public health, early childhood, to make sure that all of the voices are heard on this important topic and listened to. We increase adoption of guidance, data, measures of accountability to make sure that systems and communities and states are strong to support early identification and treatment. You'll be hearing about that today with genetic testing, and to increase adoption of evidence-based practices, as I just mentioned. I have a couple of images on the slide of our Children's Vision Equity Alliance, which we provide some staffing for, and then a couple of our fact sheets and webinar announcements. I'll be sending resources out. Quickly, our agenda today is we'll be doing some welcomes and introductions. We'll have some presentations, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. And then at the end, we'll do our conclusion and give you the link for the evaluation. Want to really begin by thanking our sponsor, Johnson & Johnson. You're going to hear from them in a moment, but really we are so appreciative of this funding to be able to bring you such informative webinars as this on inherited retinal diseases. It's my pleasure now to turn the program over to our moderator, Dr. Dawn DiCarlo. Dr. DiCarlo has lots of degrees. She received all of her degrees, really, Doctor of Optometry, Masters of Science in Public Health, and her PhD in Vision Science, all from University of Alabama at Birmingham, where she served on the faculty for 27 years. And so she's got a very rich history. She was a member of the optometry department and also the Department of Ophthalmology and Vision Sciences, where she served as director of the UAB Center for Low Vision Rehab until 2023. She is a Silver Fellow of the Association for Research in Vision and Ophthalmology and a diplomat for the Low Vision section of the American Academy of Optometry as well. She newly has joined Sightsavers America as the new CEO just in October of 2023. She and Sightsavers have had a long-term partnership and relationship that provided low vision evaluations and life-changing high-tech vision aids for Alabama children and adults with low vision. She has played an important role also in helping Sightsavers America develop its low vision and blindness program into a national model. So as our friend of Prevent Blindness and as a great expert in genetics and low vision, I am happy to turn the program over now to Dr. DiCarlo.
Thanks so much, Donna. I'm really excited to be here today. As Donna said, I've spent most of my career providing low vision services. As a provider of low vision services, most of the time you're helping people learn to make the most of what they have. And that's really why I went into low vision in the first place, was I wanted to help people that there wasn't a medication or a surgery to help. the setting my timer here on myself. So I wanted to be able to help those patients. And simultaneously, I kind of always had an interest in genetics, stemming all the way back to high school. So the two things kind of met head on at an American Academy of Optometry meeting in 2001, where Jean Bennett came and gave a presentation about a groundbreaking gene therapy that she and her colleagues had performed in dogs. They were the original large animal model that led to what we now know of as Luxturna treatment. So these dogs had a naturally occurring RPE65 mutation, and they were able to go ahead and correct that problem by inserting a healthy copy of the gene. That was so inspiring to me, and Dr. Bennett was an inspiration to me. She gave a wonderful presentation. One of the things that she said she expected to happen after that was that people were going to call and say, "Can you help my child see again?" But she said she got a lot of calls about her dogs, people wanting their dogs to be helped. Well, fast forward to 2024, and I've seen a number of people who have benefited from that actual therapy that they pioneered in dogs almost 25 years ago. So I think that by working with people who we thought there weren't treatments for, we're now bridging ourselves into an era where there's a possibility of treatments for. I think that people working with children with vision impairment are in an ideal situation to make families aware that testing is available. And we have a really awesome program today to teach you all a little bit more about how to approach testing, what testing can do, what we can learn, how these conditions may be treated. So it's an exciting time in eye care in general that we have these conditions that when I started my career, I thought, oh, we are not going to be able to help these people. We are going to provide them with magnifiers, provide them with training, orientation, mobility services. And now we're looking at entirely different ways to care for people with inherited retinal disorders. So I jumped right in with that, and talking about myself a little bit, but I did neglect to describe myself. So I am a Caucasian woman with light brown hair. I sometimes wear glasses. My picture in the slide has glasses on. I'm not wearing them today. And I'm wearing a purple and white striped shirt that my daughter chose for me. And next slide, please. So I know a lot of people that told me they were coming to this seminar are rehabilitation service providers, but I saw in the chat that there are a lot of school nurses here as well. So basically, anybody who interacts frequently with a person with an inherited retinal disorder or an IRD is somebody who should know at least something about testing, because we all have relationships with those patients or those people that garner trust. And so we can provide information, and we have the opportunity to discuss testing with them, even if we're not the ones doing the testing or interpreting the testing. But we have the opportunity to discuss these things with the patients or the child or the family so that they can learn more. Next slide, please. When I talk about genetic testing with my patients, the first thing that I tell them is that knowledge is power. And my slide says, if you know, you know. You know, if you have an inherited retinal disorder, and our very awesome speaker is going to be talking about this in much more detail in a few minutes. If you have a condition and you know the gene mutation that is responsible for that condition, you then have the opportunity to sort of follow the research in a more targeted way. You have the opportunity to discuss things at a higher level with your doctor. You have the opportunity to know if there is maybe a clinical trial available to you. If you don't know, you don't have the power to even consider those things. So we want people to have the power to make good decisions about their health care. It does not mean we're telling them, you know, you have to do X or you have to do Y just because they have the information, it gives them the power to decide what is best for themselves. And each person is going to use this information a little bit differently. I have had the great fortune to have four of my patients have Luxturna gene therapy. And you'll hear a little bit more about this in the presentation. I have one patient, she is a 12-year-old redhead wearing pigtails. She has a guitar on her lap that's probably almost as big as she is. And she wrote a little song, and I've just clipped the first just under a minute of it for you all to hear. So she wrote a song about the day that she found out that she had the RPE65 mutation, which meant she was eligible for a gene therapy.
I was sitting in the doctor's office, waiting for the results. As I wandered through the room, nothing had changed to see. Mom and Dad walking in the room, I see tears in their eyes. Mama said there is a chance I can see better. The chance that I can see the sky, colors brighten in my eyes. Can't imagine how it would be. I pray to God that it would help. I have happy tears now. The chance of a chance.
So this was an awe-inspiring day for her, and I will let you know that she did actually go on to have Luxturna treatment, and she does see quite a bit better. So next slide, please. This is just a group picture of a bunch of children, most of whom have inherited retinal disorders. And I think the purpose of this picture was just to let people know that we really want people to have peer support. So next slide, please. The webinar topics, I think Donna already touched on this: when and how children can receive testing, the benefits of testing for diagnosis, clinical trials and treatments, and strategies for providing information for families and children, and patient testimonials about their IRD journey. Next slide. I have about 2 minutes between each speaker where I'll give a brief introduction of the speakers. The full bios of all of the speakers today are on the website. So with that, next slide. Our first speaker is Sheila Hickson Curran. She is an optometrist and the medical affairs leader for retinal diseases at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. As an optometrist by training, she's conducted clinical work and research at locations all around the world and has been at J&J for over 25 years working in the eye care space. Her current role is leading a team preparing for future gene therapy solutions for previously untreatable IRDs and other eye disorders.
Thanks, Dr. DiCarlo. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm delighted to be here as the Johnson & Johnson sponsor representative, not only sponsoring this webinar, but sponsoring Prevent Blindness, an incredible organization. To describe myself for those who may be visually impaired on the line, I'm a Caucasian woman in my 50s, just in my 50s. I have graying hair. I'm wearing a red dress and a pearl necklace. And in the background, there are some large blown up pictures of eyes of different color. So I want to thank everyone for coming together here today to raise awareness for the importance of genetic testing and the role it plays in the diagnosis for patients with inherited retinal diseases. As Donna mentioned at the beginning, Prevent Blindness has been in existence for over 100 years, well over 100 years. And they've remained unwavering in their mission to prevent blindness and to preserve sight. And this is a mission that is shared by those of us at Johnson & Johnson. The Prevent Blindness organization is incredible. It's been a beacon of hope for patients and families impacted by inherited retinal diseases. It's truly, truly an inspiring organization. At Johnson & Johnson, we are committed to advancing research for patients with inherited retinal diseases, and this calls for an openness to collaborate with dedicated researchers and scientists and patient organizations like Prevent Blindness. And this occurs at every stage from early discovery to patient education. So we're here today to discuss the impact of genetic testing for inherited retinal diseases, and when and how children may receive genetic testing. This is a science that has evolved tremendously over the last few years, and it's an incredibly important aspect of patient care. While none of us can change what we inherit in our genes, one can find answers through genetic testing, and that can help inform your own health, your family's health perhaps, and make some important life choices. Really, the earlier you test, the sooner you can receive an accurate diagnosis. Our team at Johnson & Johnson is on a mission to preserve and restore vision for those living with retinal diseases, and we're excited about what the future may bring. By encompassing innovative science and technology and working with patient advocacy groups, we can have a patient-centric focus to our research. So again, thanks again to Prevent Blindness for your relentless commitment to making a difference for families of children with inherited retinal diseases and other people who have visual impairment. I'm looking forward to hearing from this wonderful panel of physicians and patients who are going to share important insights. And I just want to thank you so much and look forward to the webinar.
Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Notario Kauser, who received his undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia, his medical degree from Virginia Commonwealth University, his ophthalmology residency at Howard University, and fellowship training in pediatric ophthalmology and adult strabismus at Emory University. He also completed a Master of Science degree in biotechnology from Johns Hopkins and training in clinical genetics at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's one of the few double board certified physicians in both ophthalmology and medical genetics and genomics. He has an extensive portfolio of work, including serving as vice chair of the American Association for Pediatric Ophthalmology and Strabismus Genetics Eye Disorder Committee and a member of the Basic Science Course Committee for the American Academy of Ophthalmology and Patient-Centered Outcomes Institute Advisory Panel on Rare Diseases. Most recently, he's announced that he's going to be joining the Kennedy Krieger Institute, Wilmer Eye Institute, and Medical Genetics Department of Genetic Medicine at Johns Hopkins University this summer. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kauser.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for that kind introduction. I want to welcome our viewers from around the country and world. If you're a provider, if you're here to educate yourself, if you're a patient or a family member of someone that has an inherited retinal disease, I want to welcome you all, or if you're a combination of those. I am a Black American, light skin, my early 40s. I'm wearing a dark suit for blue tie, and I have a bookshelf in the background. And I give my talk from Richmond, Virginia.
You're in presenter mode, Dr. Kauser. Perfect.
Okay. These are my disclosures there. So my goal is to not have everyone drinking from the metaphorical fire hose. but it is a substantial amount of information. I really want to boil my objectives down to 3 main points. One, give an overview of the underlying genetic aspects of inherited retinal diseases. Describe the challenges in making a diagnosis in patients with an IRD and highlight the importance of genetic testing in this process. And to share some experiences and resources in the management of patients with IRDs. Our bodies are composed of trillions of cells from head to toe. The majority of these cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes. On these chromosomes are approximately 20,000 genes. Each individual gene provides instructions to make a protein, and sometimes more than one protein. The proteins carry out the jobs in our body. For example, there are proteins that determine how well our heart beats, how well we breathe in and out through the function of our lungs, as well as proteins that help allow us to see. When everything is working correctly, it can be depicted here in this picture of an individual viewing a soccer ball in the distance. Light rays from the soccer ball enter the front part of the eye through the cornea, the space between the iris and the pupil, the lens inside the eye, which helps with the focusing power. The light rays traverse through the clear, transparent material called vitreous and land on the retina, which is the light-sensitive tissue that converts these light rays into signals transported to the optic nerve to the brain to allow us to see that soccer ball. Now, when there's a change within a section of the DNA that's shown in this picture here, this highlighted area in the DNA double helix, this could represent a substitution, it could represent a missing area in the DNA, or an additional component. And all these things could alter the ability for the gene to provide the instructions that it normally does for the eye. And instead of having a normal function in vision, you can have problems that can manifest in the patient experience, as well as how the retina inside the eye appears. Now, inherited retinal diseases are a heterogeneous collection of disorders characterized by abnormalities in photoreceptor cells. These photoreceptor cells are in the retina. And although hereditary eye diseases are rare, genetic factors are a major underlying cause of childhood blindness and a significant cause of visual impairment in adults. Studies have shown that there's associated with high economic costs globally. It's one of the most common low vision certifications from patients with inherited retinal diseases, and it can also lead to a reduction in the quality of life. There's approximately 4,900 genes out of the 20,000 that have phenotype disease associations. So this is with all conditions. In particular, of IRDs, there's variants in over 300 of these genes associated. Some of these common ones are listed here, and I put common in quotations because all of these are rare. One of the more common ones at the top here, about retinitis pigmentosa, has a disease prevalence of 1 in 4,500 individuals. And if you extrapolate that from the US population, there's approximately 100,000 individuals with retinitis pigmentosa in the US. And if you compare that to one of the more common eye conditions, such as diabetic retinopathy, there's 9.6 million individuals in the US with that. And age-related macular degeneration and dry eye disease, there's around 20 million individuals each. So you can see there's a big difference here. And again, these are rare, but when you start adding them up, each individual condition, that's when you get the major impact that these conditions have. Now, late in these conditions, the symptoms can be a combination of things. They can be affecting your central vision, your peripheral vision, your color vision. But early on, many of these conditions have unique symptoms. But when you look at things in totality, you start to see patterns. For example, retinitis pigmentosa and Usher syndrome, which is a syndromic form of retinitis pigmentosa, one of the early symptoms are loss of night vision. If you look at achromatopsia, cone rod dystrophy, Leber congenital amaurosis, these all patients have light sensitivity. If you look again at achromatopsia and Leber's, these patients often present with nystagmus or eye shaking. And so when you start to look at all these different conditions, we can really break it down into 7 things that one should be thinking about as a provider interacting with these patients that could signal that the patient in front of you may have inherited retinal disease. Number 1, vision problems unable to be corrected with glasses or contact lens. This could be a red flag, in particular in the setting of a declining vision. Number 2, sensitivity to lights. Number 3, trouble navigating in dim light conditions, also known as night blindness. This could be the individual that used to be able to drive at night and they no longer can. Or if they're in their home and you turn off the lights, they can't make it to the bed because they have a difficult time navigating in those light conditions. Number 4, challenges with peripheral vision. Number 5, problems distinguishing colors, in particular in the setting of a situation where you were able to distinguish colors at one point, and then you lose the ability to do this. Number 6, eye movement abnormalities. I mentioned nystagmus, the eye shaking. That can certainly be a clue that there could potentially be an underlying inherited retinal disease. And then number 7, a positive family history of IRDs. So if any one of these things are present, especially in a combination of these, then one should suspect, or at least consider, there's a possibility that the individual could have inherited retinal disease. And there are challenges to making the diagnosis when you base things on clinical suspicion alone without incorporating genetic testing. And what do I mean by that? So there's something called variable expressivity. This means that individuals, even amongst the same family, could inherit the same change in their DNA, and they could express symptoms differently. So this could propose a challenge with a provider trying to make a diagnosis. The individual could also have something called incomplete penetrance. This means that with the same example, even within the family, both family members could inherit the same DNA change or mutation, and one could have symptoms and the other one could have absolutely no symptoms. This makes it challenging in terms of looking at family history and trying to make a diagnosis. We also have situations that are not uncommon for vision abnormalities to be present in the setting of a normal appearing fundus. And I've experienced many patients with this, and they get told, unfortunately, that they're faking, they're making things up, they're not telling the truth, because when they go to their provider, everything looks
Sound
normal.
technology for digital microphones right for it and will now be used.
The 4th thing, overlapping clinical features. This also makes it challenging. And this can be shown here. So this is why this is challenging from a genetic testing standpoint, because there can be conditions that have a similar gene that can actually cause different phenotypes or different conditions. So this, in addition to the other things, can make it very challenging to make a diagnosis when you're not incorporating a genetic testing component. Now, recent advances in molecular genetics have helped identify a substantial number of genes and conditions known to contribute to eye disease. But even with this, the average journey to reach a diagnosis in a child with a rare genetic disease is over a decade. We actually did a study at our own institution here in Richmond, where we looked at the first 100 patients, and we found that from the time of the first visual symptom that the patient had to the time they reached a diagnosis, on average was 15 years. And this is just way too long based on the technology that we have and the capabilities that we have. And this long odyssey that the patients and families go on involves numerous doctor visits and diagnostic tests, and it creates a significant emotional and financial burden on both the patient and family. Now, obtaining a genetic molecular diagnosis to establish or confirm a suspected diagnosis may give you several advantages for the patients and families. And again, this is different than the clinical diagnosis, which is based on the provider's suspicion. Molecular diagnosis is based on the genetic testing. So this may help to guide recurrence risk counseling for the family. It may afford the patient and family with resources that they may not have otherwise had access to. And with that, there have been examples of extremely rare conditions that have been able to connect members with other affected individuals with this rare condition. And that alone provided a great sense of comfort to be able to talk with somebody who had a similar condition. Also, assists in developing a management strategy that includes making appropriate referrals for syndromic cases for which other organ systems may be at risk for problems. I mentioned Usher syndrome earlier. It's important for those patients to have their hearing evaluated as well, because that could be a part of their condition. And also the clinical trials and treatment. In clinical trials, you'll hear a little bit more about later, but this is important because many of the trials, as part of their eligibility criteria, is that you have to have a molecular diagnosis. So you can't go on the clinical suspicion alone. And so that's why it's very key for patients and families with have a suspicion of inherited retinal disease that they go the full mile to get the genetic testing and try to obtain the molecular diagnosis from the testing. And there's a variety of different things. This is a busy slide, but the key takeaway here is that all tests are not created equally. There's different things that we use in our armamentarium, or our ability to be able to try to find a diagnosis. And it's really individualized based on the patient and family in front of us. Sometimes we have a very high suspicion for a particular condition, and we can do very narrow testing. And then other times we need to go more broad testing. So it could be a situation where we're testing one gene, or we could test for several genes called a panel testing, or maybe some situations where we need to look at all the genes. And again, there's different advantages, limitations, there's different time windows that it takes to do these tests. This is very specialized testing. Often when we get the sample in clinic, we have to send this test to special laboratories around the country. Often there may be 1, 2, 3 labs in the whole country or even world that does the specialized testing. And then there's also costs involved, depending on which test you pursue. And to present some cases. So these are all patients that I encountered with in my particular clinic. And these are really rapid fire cases, just to give you some examples. This first case was a 16-year-old male with impaired visual acuity at distance and near for 10 years. There was no improvement with refraction, with a vision of 20/70, 20/80. The patient was previously seen by numerous optometrists, ophthalmologists, neuro-ophthalmologists, retina specialists. There was also a brain MRI that was normal. And the patient was distraught. He was a very good student, and he just, was really adamant that his vision was declining, and the family really wanted to know what was going on. And he had been told by multiple times that he was faking. Genetic testing revealed a pathogenic variant in an RP1L1 gene that identified the patient with a condition called occult macular dystrophy. And this is a condition that's very difficult to determine what the cause is by looking at the retina alone. The second case was a 26-year-old male who was referred for a clinical diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. Ultimately, we identified pathogenic variants that was consistent with another condition. So this patient carried this incorrect diagnosis for several years, only to find out that he had a different condition called Stargardt disease. Case 3 was a 9-year-old female.
Dr. Hauser,
yeah.
I think we only have a few seconds left, so if we could maybe do a little wrap up instead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sure. So yeah, so this patient ultimately we identified mutations of RP65, consistent with Leber's congenital amaurosis, and this patient was able to receive gene therapy to improve their vision. This last case, just to speed up here, was a patient that had retinitis pigmentosa, as well as the spouse did as well, and they were very confused about the inheritance pattern in the family, and we were able to help with that based on the genetic testing. So take-home points: although majority of eye diseases are individually rare, collectively they are major underlying cause of significant visual impairment. As a provider, don't rely on your best guess for a diagnosis. The initial clinical diagnosis may often be incorrect. Many patients and families experience a lengthy period of delay in reaching a correct diagnosis, and an increased awareness of the important role of genetics in the management of RD is needed, since it is incumbent upon the provider to initiate the referral for the genetics evaluation and testing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hauser. That was a great presentation. One of the things that I was supposed to do was a little wrap up, and you got that in there for me. So thank you so much for doing that. I did like in the very beginning, one of your first points was that these may be rare conditions, but in combination, they make a major impact. And I think that that's very true for conditions that affect a child. Many of these conditions do start early in childhood, and so they have a lot of life years affected relative to the much larger numbers of people who develop maybe macular degeneration, but only experience it for a few years of their life. So this is really important work that you're doing, and thank you so much for it. Our next speaker is a patient. And so Adrienne Creve is the president for local chapter of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and she passionately advocates for individuals with blindness and low vision. She has a wealth of experience and compassion that she brings to her advocacy work, and she generously shares her personal experiences to raise awareness, in particular for Stargardt disease. I'll turn it over to Adrienne now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Adrienne Keeve, and I am a Caucasian woman, early 40s, with brown and gray hair, a mix of brown and gray hair, wavy hair. I'm wearing a white top with blue flowers. When I was 8 years old, I realized that there was something going on with my vision. I was noticing a difference between myself and my classmates. They could read the board, and I could not read the board. I was given glasses. They helped for a bit, but I was back pretty soon trying to get a new prescription because I couldn't see the board again. So my grandmother, she wanted to take me to her optometrist. So she set up an appointment, and my dad and I went. This optometrist examined me. Then he started interrogating me. He asked me if I had been staring at the sun lately or doing anything that I shouldn't be doing. I said, no, I hadn't been doing anything like that. And he said that he couldn't help me if I didn't tell the truth. And I was really embarrassed. I didn't like having all of that attention on me. And I hadn't been doing anything wrong, and I knew that. But the optometrist told my family that I was making it up for attention, and what I really needed was a psychiatrist. That was something that was spoken about earlier, and that is something that happened to me. I just sat there quietly with my cheeks burning, just humiliated about what had happened in that appointment. Luckily, my parents, they didn't really buy that diagnosis, so we went to see an ophthalmologist. They determined that there was something going on, but they weren't sure what it was. So they sent me to the University of Iowa. It's a pretty well-known school, university that studies inherited retinal diseases, among other things. And they determined that I had Stargardt disease. I was 12 years old and already at that point nearly legally blind. Stargardt disease is typically diagnosed in children. It causes central vision loss, and that results in difficulty reading standard print, depth perception issues, trouble recognizing faces. I have a lot of light sensitivity, and I have a lot of light flashes that occur in my visual field. So the early years after my diagnosis were really difficult. I struggled in school. I didn't have any accommodations, so I just did the best I could by listening and by taking my textbooks home and reading them at night, since I wasn't really able to see the board or get any other visual information that my classmates were getting. My parents did not discuss my vision impairment outside of my eye appointments, including even with me. So I kind of learned from them that that's something that we don't talk about. So I didn't talk about it with anybody either. I didn't tell people in school that I was having trouble. And that optometrist definitely had an impact on my decision to kind of hide my vision impairment. I thought that other people would think I was lying if I tried to tell people that I couldn't see, because people say all the time, like, oh, you don't look blind. But I am. So hiding my vision impairment took a toll on my self-esteem and my mental health. I eventually made it through high school, and even I wanted to go to college, so I went to college. My first semester of college, I learned pretty quickly that college is a little different than high school, and I couldn't keep up in the same way. So I was on academic probation after my first semester and did leave college. So this was really difficult because, yeah, I felt like I was a smart kid and that the only thing holding me back was my vision impairment. And I just didn't know that I could ask for help. I didn't know that there were accommodations. I didn't know that that was something that I could do. So I didn't do that. In a misguided attempt to be a normal teenager, I pursued getting a driver's license. Yeah, I was pretty much legally blind, and somebody thought it was fine to give me a driver's license. It took a while, but they did issue me one. And after a few years, something happened where I almost hit a pedestrian when I was driving to school one day. I didn't realize that I had passed her. Um, she was already past me, or I was already past her before I realized she was even there. She was jogging on the narrow shoulder, and it was just luck that I didn't hit her with my car. I was going probably about 45 miles an hour, so it would have been really bad. After that, I gave up my license. This also meant that I had to give up my job. I
Adrian,
was, yes,
you're about out of
okay.
time. We could
Thank
wrap
you.
up. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, so I was 25 years old, unemployed, college dropout. I didn't know what I was going to do. Eventually, my husband and I relocated. I was connected with some resources in my state rehabilitation agency. I returned to school, got my bachelor's degree, graduated with high honors. So, those accommodations and those resources really helped me reach my potential and get what I wanted to do in life. Since then, I've been working on advocating for folks with vision impairments. I work for my state rehabilitation agency now, helping children kind of navigate what I had so much trouble with in school. And one of the things that really helped me was I did eventually get a genetic confirmation of my diagnosis. So that kind of put my mind at ease, like, nope, definitely wasn't making it up. So it was good to have that diagnosis confirmed through the Foundation Fighting Blindness genetic testing program.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Adrian. I hate to cut you off
that's
here, but
okay.
we have to move along. But thank you so much for sharing your story. That was
Thank you.
very brave of you to do. And I wish I could tell you that I never saw a patient that didn't have a similar story, but I can't tell you that. I've heard that similar story before, and I'm sorry for what you went through. But I'm glad that there are more and more people able to give better diagnoses. And I think that is in part due to the clinicians that are present here today, Dr. Kauser, Dr. Lynn. Dr. Lynn is our next speaker, and she is a clinician and an educator. So she's training the next generation of optometrists to hopefully do a better job than yours did. I've seen the same thing coming to me from both optometrists and ophthalmologists. So it's a very unfortunate thing when that happens. But our next speaker is Dr. Lynn, who has both a doctor of optometry and a master's of science in vision science. And she comes to us from the Southern Hemisphere, but she is an associate professor at the Southern California College of Optometry at Marshall B. Ketchum University.
Thank you, Dawn. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Rochelle Lynn. Over the next 15 minutes, I'll go over a little bit more in depth about resources to help families go through that journey to a diagnosis, which we know oftentimes can be quite long and difficult. I think the normal descriptive AI softwares would kindly describe me as a smiling woman in her 30s of Asian descent. Here are my disclosure statements. I have been a speaker or consultant for Applied Genetic Technologies Corporation, Spark Therapeutics, and Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine. So where do patients and families often hear about genetic testing out in the world? And it's not uncommon for patients and family members to hear about direct-to-consumer testing, those tests that we see advertisements at your big box stores as Christmas gifts to family members that can tell you fun facts about your genetics. However, these are not the same as in-office provider-ordered testing. There are many limitations to direct-to-consumer tests. They are not held to the same standards of medical tests, and therefore they are not recommended for the diagnosis of IRDs, inherited retinal diseases, for multiple reasons. However, because these tests are so prevalent, it does bring the idea of genetic testing to mind, so it's not uncommon for parents to wonder about genetic testing for their child, especially if they suspect that there is an eye disease or if there's a family history of eye disease. So what do we recommend? As Dr. Kauser mentioned, we recommend in-office provider-ordered testing, and these are tests that are done by very specific approved laboratories and can test for these very specific rare conditions that the patient may have. A common question that I get from parents is, should they test or should they not test their child? And this is a very difficult decision. It's one thing for an adult to decide whether or not they personally want testing, but to decide for a child may mean that you're taking over a little bit of that patient's autonomy. This is a very important decision because what you might learn from a genetic test, you can't unlearn. So we oftentimes want our patients to speak with an inherited retinal dystrophy specialist or genetic counselor before they do that test. And this helps parents make informed decisions. We want them to understand the benefits, the limitations, and any potential negative effects of genetic testing. This also helps us make sure that the correct test panels are used because there are many different test panels for different conditions. We want to decide on that appropriate test panel based off of the patient's clinical presentation and the diagnoses that we suspect the patient may have. And as Dr. Kauser mentioned, a lot of these conditions are very complex. Who are candidates for genetic testing? Well, number one, we do recommend genetic testing for patients with inherited retinal dystrophies. If on an eye exam we notice that there is an IRD, the standards and the guidelines now recommend that genetic testing for the molecular diagnosis. In addition to eye conditions, we do want to keep an eye out for patients with syndromic conditions. For example, if you see a kid with childhood hearing loss that might be in conjunction with vision loss, early onset diabetes or obesity, skeletal issues, or potential kidney dysfunction. We want to identify these conditions earlier rather than later because some of these conditions can be medically managed. Another special consideration is that we should test affected adults before testing asymptomatic children. What I mean by that, patients, oftentimes parents come in and say, I have a family history of an eye condition and my child seems totally okay. Just should I do genetic testing? And I always say, number one, get an eye exam first. If the eye exam is completely normal and the kid is not having any problems, we do not need to do genetic testing. However, if we find that there is something wrong with the eyes or the vision, then we do want to proceed. But if there is an affected adult in the family, let's test them first because they are an adult. What might that team look like when it comes to genetic testing for inherited eye conditions? Oftentimes you will have a core team that includes an inherited retinal dystrophy specialist, a low vision provider, as well as a genetic counselor. And of course, there's a much larger team that works with children with vision loss, including our occupational therapists, O&Ms, and many of you in the audience today. Before we jump into a diagnosis of a rare inherited eye condition, we do want to make sure that the patient does have a comprehensive eye exam first. What is this useful for? Well, we want to rule out other conditions, and many of these are treatable. Some of them may be related or unrelated to the inherited eye condition. For example, refractive issues. Does the kid have nearsightedness, farsightedness, or astigmatism that we can easily correct with glasses or contact lens to improve the vision as much as possible? Does the patient have issues with eye teaming or eye alignment? Might they have something that we call strabismus, where there's an eye turn? Does the kid have eye focusing problems where they have difficulty making things clear when text is up close? Does the kid have difficulties with eye movements, nystagmus, those uncontrollable eye shaking? Or do they have color vision defects? We know that 25% of school-age children have eye or vision problems. These can be milder, these can be more severe. Many of these are treatable. Unfortunately, when it comes to IRDs, a lot of these we don't have treatments for currently, though we do have a lot of ongoing research. One thing to note, though, is that when we are seeing patients with inherited retinal conditions, the prevalence of these additional vision problems, such as nearsightedness, farsightedness, high astigmatism, eye movement disorders, eye turns, and color vision problems is even higher. So we do need to treat those patients for the parts that are treatable. How can we help kids? We want to make sure they are referred for a low vision exam if they have vision loss. So what happens during that low vision exam? We want to work with the patient to establish individualized goals, be that succeeding in school, seeing the board, going to college, excelling at work. We want to assess their vision with our specialized tools that are meant for low vision. And if there is any usable vision that we can find, we want to maximize the use of that vision, either with glasses that can help or with low vision devices such as magnifiers, telescopes, and digital technology. Last but not least, we want to make sure patients get the referrals they need and the recommendations to achieve their goals. And oftentimes this means having an extra person in your pocket who's an advocate for you. What might happen during a genetic test visit? Well, during a genetic test visit, I tell parents it's 95% paperwork. So remember to sit around for a lot of paperwork. And then about 5% of the time, getting a sample collection. That paperwork includes informed consent and making sure the parents and the child know what they're signing up for. And for the sample collection, we don't have to get blood. We can easily use spit in a tube or a cheek swab. After we get the results, we always set up a visit with the parents and the children to go over those results together. What are the benefits of genetic testing? Dr. Kauser mentioned to improve the accuracy of diagnosis and prognosis, improve the accuracy of genetic counseling, and development and delivery of mechanism-specific care, such as gene therapy. What are some risks? There are always some risks, for example, effects on family planning, effects on the patient emotional state, effects on family member relationships, or unwanted discoveries. And there are limitations to genetic testing. We can find a causative mutation in about 56 to 76% of cases, but not 100% just yet with the current limitations in science. But this will slowly improve with time. Special considerations, parents often ask, do I have to wait for that genetic test result to start making accommodations and recommendations for my child? Absolutely not. During that eye exam, we want to test that child's functional vision, and we can absolutely start making recommendations and accommodations at the school based off of those eye exam and vision exam findings. However, can genetic testing help? Absolutely. It can help with our prognosis and recommendations. I have a patient who is a very young boy, and he was being pulled out of class with his peers, which he loved. He loved being with his peers, and he hated being pulled out of class to learn Braille every week. And from our genetic testing, we found that he has a very stable form of cone dystrophy, and that if this is the only condition he ever develops in his life, he will have pretty functional vision for his entire life, and he will never need to use Braille. So we were able to say to the parents and to the school, this kid does not need to be learning Braille. What are some barriers to genetic testing? Oftentimes, patients are worried about the cost. The cost has gone down significantly over time, and options are available for sponsored testing. This is high quality testing that is provided free of charge to patients. Some foundations that provide this are Foundation Fighting Blindness through their My Retina Tracker program and Invitae's Inherited Retinal Disease program. There are also income-based financial assistance programs if you're not eligible for the current sponsored testing. Some other barriers to genetic testing and solutions for them include access. Patients oftentimes have difficulty with transportation, distance from an IRD specialist, and language barriers. Luckily, we do have solutions for some of these issues. With the growth of telemedicine, even if you live more remotely from a specialized testing center, you may be able to get that testing that you need and access through telemedicine, or even having genetic tests shipped to you if necessary. There is also concerns about mistrust or of the health system. Genetic testing and research registries. Unfortunately, we do have a history in our country of some issues with previous atrocities and issues with medical discrimination. So if patients do have concerns about that, it is important that they get to sit down with a specialist or genetic counselor and discuss and address their concerns. They should learn about the current protections against genetic discrimination, as well as the benefits of research registries. And on this last slide, I provided some resources for our patients and family members to help find a specialist that works well with them. There is the AOA Find a Doctor search. AOA stands for American Optometric Association. And on that webpage, you can specify the location where you're living and the practice services and special emphases that you're looking for. This could include children's vision if you're just looking for a specialist who is happy to see children. There is also a service for no-cost infant assessments. That's free eye exams for children between 6 months and 1 year of age. So you can search for doctors who provide that service. And you can also search for doctors who provide low vision services within their office. There is also the Low Vision Prescriber Network, which is another search engine where you can find low vision prescribers throughout the country. And last but not least, the Foundation Finding Blindness website, which has a list of retinal specialists across the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynn. That was a really good overview of genetic testing and how it the sequence of things for a patient. And I think it is so important to, not assume because there's a vision problem that it's an inherited retinal disorder. I think in medicine, they often say when you hear hoofbeats, don't assume it's a zebra. So I think that first eye exam is crucially important. And then following the leads. And fortunately today, when we have a suspicion, we have so many more tools in our toolbox than when Adrian would have been going through this. And genetic testing is just one of those many tools in our toolbox. But we have another patient story that we're going to hear now. Our next patient is Joy Thomas. She's an Aspect graduate. She is a credentialed master's level teacher and has worked in the field of education for over 20 years. She has specialized training in the areas of academic and mental health interventions, 504 accommodations, and advocacy. She draws from experience as both an educator and a student with a disability. She co-authors the doublevisionblog.com with her twin sister, which documents life with an inherited retinal condition. So I'm going to turn it over to Joy now.
Thank you. So starting with my introduction, I am a woman with blonde, straight hair with wearing a white shirt with black and pink stripes and a little collar and a little silver necklace with intersecting hearts. My daughter gave me. So good to be here. And I would say my perspective is a little bit different from what you've heard so far. My journey of vision loss begins at the age of 5. And while there were many questions that were asked and answered, I would say that my journey of growing up with an inherited retinal condition was much more shaped by the questions that were not asked. And this ultimately did lead me into the field of education, first as an English teacher for middle school students, and then currently as an interventionist and advocate. So one of the very first questions my parents did ask when I was 5 years old was, why is it that our 5-year-old identical twin daughters are agile and active and very curious during the daytime, but then become a little bit hesitant and a little bit clumsy as soon as the sun goes down? And as we heard from a few ophthalmologists, I think you know where this is headed. And we were fortunate, actually. I know Dr. Kauser was saying how long it takes for diagnoses. But for us, my parents took us to an optometrist who asked us to follow along this little big bird figurine with our eyes without moving our heads. And when we weren't able to do that, I think the combination of that loss of peripheral vision that he noticed and the combination of the night blindness led him to refer us to an ophthalmologist at the University of Illinois Chicago Hospital, where we lived at the time. And that's where Dr. Gerald Fishman diagnosed us with retinitis pigmentosa, which I know you've heard about so far. And the gene that was mentioned earlier was the RPE65 gene. But we kind of won the genetic lottery and ended up with the CRB1 gene, unfortunately, which doesn't have as much research with it now or treatments that go along with, but still hopeful that there will be others because of this one. But because of that, we had early onset blindness. And so even though our central vision was intact at the time, we had always under 20 degrees of peripheral vision, and most people have about 180. And so it was pretty impactful. And we did have genetic testing as a family that revealed that our two younger siblings did not have RP, as we called it. It was such a mouthful for us children at the time. But my twin sister and I, of course, did. And I think we didn't really understand how our eyes worked. I asked my parents, what's peripheral vision? And they said, oh, it's your side vision. But I would wave my hands to the sides and I could see them fine. I could see print at the time and I could recognize my friends' faces. And so it was confusing, like, well, how does this really impact me? And yet I would find myself in these very precarious situations in school where I was very misunderstood. Children often would call me spacey or rude because I would see an eraser that I dropped across the room and I would go to pick it up and I would trip over an entire student sitting on the floor. So it was so confusing to me. How could I see this tiny thing across the room and then trip over something or run into something that was right in front of me? Because again, I didn't understand how my eyes worked. So when kids in PE class would yell at me, "You're not even trying," when the ball would fly over my head or when it would hit me in the face, I think it was really confusing, and I started to feel like there was something more wrong with me, even besides my eyes. And so I think that really did lead me to eventually go into education myself, because there were so many questions in school that were not answered. I had a vision itinerant who she would blow things up really large, which oftentimes just made it worse. She would do all the typical things I think she thought she was supposed to do for a low vision student. And yet, if she had asked a simple question, or any educator in my life, a school nurse, a parent, if anyone had asked a couple simple questions, what is it about your day that feels really easy? Or what is it about your day that you hate that feels so challenging? They would have in a minute discovered the reason why I would go to the nurse every day before PE class complaining of a headache or not want to go to school. So I think that it is essential when we are interacting with patients and clients, students, whatever relationship we each have here on this webinar today with students, to remember, first of all, that it's more than, we are more than our diagnoses, more than our inherited conditions, but also that that we each have really individual needs because we're individual people. And to treat a student holistically really does require asking those questions. What is it that is hard about your day? What is it that makes you want to come to school? And what is it that makes you want to shut down? You'll get some answers pretty quickly, and you will know whether that student maybe needs some psychosocial education, some social emotional support, maybe some academic strategies, but we won't know that until we ask those questions. So I do invite everyone here listening today to make sure that we're asking, going back to the basics, asking those simple questions and then really listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joy. Those were some really key points. I think that, we all can learn more when we really give children opportunities to tell us. And, they may not have the right words at first, but we really have to give them the opportunity to speak and to encourage them through the right questions. And I think that some of the points that Dr. Notario Kauser, sorry, Notario, that Dr. Kauser made early on about the symptoms. Those are things that I think the school nurse, can ask about if a child is coming to their office very frequently and investigating that and helping parents to get them to an eye exam or to making sure that child is included in any screening that's happening at the school. So our next speaker is Ben Shaberman. Ben is the Vice President of Science Communications for the Foundation Fighting Blindness. He has been working with the foundation for nearly 20 years. He is an expert at communicating this information. I love hearing Ben talk because he can speak not only at the high level science level, but he also can speak at a very easy to understand lay level. And he hosts a great podcast called Eye on the Cure, which is available on most podcast platforms, where he's giving information about what's going on in the world of IRDs. He's also written 3 books, one of which is Retinal Boy, which I have not read, but am curious to read now. He has a Master of Arts in Writing from Johns Hopkins and a Master of Science in Systems Management from the University of Maryland. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben now.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and thank you to Prevent Blindness, Johnson & Johnson, and my fellow presenters for being a part of this webinar. I am, just to describe myself, I am a white male. I'm wearing a navy suit jacket with a button-down shirt, and I have gray-brown hair and a gray-brown beard, but the gray is winning the battle. So a little bit about the Foundation Fighting Blindness before I start talking about clinical trials and our patient registry. The Foundation Fighting Blindness, our core mission is to drive research for treatments and cures for inherited retinal diseases and dry AMD. So when we say inherited retinal diseases, they include things like retinitis pigmentosa, Usher syndrome, Stargardt disease, Leber congenital amaurosis, and the list goes on. We fund research around the world. We currently fund about 90 projects in the US, Europe, and beyond. We are investing in gene therapy development, stem cell therapies, small molecules, and other approaches. So next slide, please. So excitingly, research has really taken a positive and dramatic turn over the last 10 or 15 years. And we now have many, many human studies underway for emerging therapies. And one of my roles at the foundation is to keep track of all the clinical trials that are underway. And that's becoming a more and more challenging task because there are so many. But currently, there are about 50 clinical trials underway for emerging therapies for inherited retinal diseases, and we include some select dry AMD therapies in that number. And what's really exciting to me, I came up with this second metric recently, is that in about 20 of those trials, we're showing some meaningful efficacy, that vision is either being preserved or restored in 20 of these human studies. And that, I think, is really hopeful and encouraging because it shows that the approaches that we're taking to overcome inherited retinal diseases are working. Now, to get FDA, EMA regulatory approval is challenging. You can't just show efficacy. You need to actually meet the threshold, which can be challenging, that the FDA and the EMA and the other regulators require you to meet. But it does show that we're doing the right thing, I think. We're directing research in the right ways to make a difference in people's vision. Now, in addition to clinical research for therapies, we also conduct natural history studies, which are really important in understanding disease progression, identifying patients for clinical trials, and also identifying endpoints that we can use in clinical trials, outcome measures, so that when we do have a promising therapy, we can meet the parameters that the regulators require us to meet. And of course, I've talked to patients and families all the time, and everyone's excited about clinical trials, as are we. They really provide hope that vision can be saved and restored for affected patients and families. And likewise, we need patients and families to participate in the clinical trials if we're going to move the research forward. So patients and families have a couple of different roles, but I think it's also really important for our constituents to understand that clinical trials are research. Not every therapy in a clinical trial is going to work, and there are risks. So that's an important reminder for patients that when they do enroll in a clinical trial, first and foremost, they're driving research. Next slide. So one important way to help drive enrollment for clinical trials is to get into a registry if you're a patient or a family member with, let's say, a child who's affected. And the Foundation Fighting Blindness launched what we call our My Retina registry almost 10 years ago to get patients on the radar screen of researchers and companies that are recruiting for clinical trials. My Retina Tracker is available to anybody with an inherited retinal disease. It's a global registry, and people can go to myretinatracker.org to register. Again, this was funded, developed, and we continue to enhance the registry. As I've already said, it's global, there's no cost, and it's highly secure. We feel that's really important in terms of protecting patient information. And it is, for the most part, the patient who controls the record, who creates the record and maintains the record. But we have implemented a pretty easy to use user interface to enable people, whether you have normal vision, low vision, or even blind, to maintain your record. It does work with most screen readers. Now, an important aspect of the registry is that we protect patient privacy. When a company or a researcher is interested in doing recruitment for a trial, we never give out the personal information. Rather, if a patient or a family member is interested in a trial and they come up in a query, it is the patient and the family who are asked to reach out to the company or the researcher. So the researcher and the company are never given personal information. It's the patient and family that are notified that their criteria match a particular clinical trial. Excitingly, we have more than 30,000 registrants at this point. About 2/3 of those registrants have a genetic diagnosis, and that information is in the registry. And through the history of My Retina Tracker, we've had more than 35 researchers and companies that have come to us to do study and trial recruitment. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we try to make My Retina Tracker as easy to use for people as possible, including those with low vision or blindness. But if you want help, you can send an email to coordinator@myretinatracker.org, and somebody can walk you through the process and help you develop and maintain that record. And you heard from Dr. Lin about our no-cost genetic testing program that's available to people in the US who have a clinical diagnosis of an inherited retinal disease. Well, now when you go through that program, your record is automatically created in My Retina Tracker. Next slide, please. So finally, to conclude, I just wanted to mention some other resources that you can access to learn about clinical trials. One of my jobs, as I mentioned earlier at the foundation, is to keep clinical trials, keep track of the trials that are underway around the world. And I actually manage a pipeline chart that is available on our website. Just go to fightingblindness.org/clinical-trial-pipeline, and you can access that chart. Again, My Retina Tracker is a great way to learn about clinical trials. And then the National Institutes of Health part of our federal government, maintains a website called clinicaltrials.gov, which lists just about every clinical trial underway in the US and many overseas, not only for eye and retinal conditions, for any condition. So you can learn about clinical trials in our space from clinicaltrials.gov. They're trying to make the user interface a little more friendly, and it can be a little overwhelming, the amount of information that is presented in that website, but it is a great resource. And then finally, if you have questions about anything I've talked about today, or more questions about your inherited retinal disease and the research underway, you can send an email to info@fightingblindness.org. And that concludes my little talk. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was an awesome overview of My Retina Tracker. I know I've enrolled many, many patients in it. I think it's a wonderful program that the Foundation Fighting Blindness is doing. We are going to answer just a couple of questions today so that we have a little bit of time for a wrap up at the end. And so there are a couple of questions that have already been answered in the chat. So, or in the Q&A, so that's been answered directly back to the participant. So let's, I'm going to just throw out a question to both Dr. Lin and Dr. Kauser. How do you talk to families about the registries? What is your approach to encourage people to enroll in these or to not encourage them?
A lot like what Ben said, I think patients oftentimes are wary about a registry until you explain to them all the benefits. And of course, family members and patients themselves want to know if they're eligible for this cutting edge clinical trials or any potential gene therapies. So I told them, if you want to get that up-to-date information, of course you can meet with your retinal specialists, but another direct way is just to share that information with the My Retina Tracker registry, which is secure, so that you can opt in for that additional information from those companies that are searching for you with your very rare eye condition. And I think when patients understand those benefits and how secure it is, that they do elect to opt in.
Anything you want to add, Dr. Kauser or Sheila?
That was good. I agree with that answer as well. I typically try to encourage my patients. I've certainly utilized that registry for patients several times over, and I typically tell patients and families to even do the genetic testing. There's three main reasons why to do it. As I mentioned some of those in my talk, is we want to figure out what the diagnosis is, what is the inheritance pattern, and that third thing is really get them connected to the clinical trials and potential treatments. And the registries are one of those steps that help do that. I do my best. We do our best to try to keep track of our patients and the conditions they have and new trials that pop up and things like that. But being involved with that registry and have that extra set of eyes to be able to help inform the patients with changes or new things that come about, really can only benefit the patients. And as Dr. Lin mentioned, I think the key thing is informing the patients and families that the data is kept securely, and that this really is a beneficial thing that can help them out.
Yeah, and the one additional thing I'd add about registries, these are non-interventional trials. So not only can patients be made aware when there are treatment trials available for them, but they can be tracked so that the natural history of the disease is understood, tracking patients over a long period of time. And that's very, very important in the regulatory pathway to take treatments to regulators like the FDA, so they can compare the actual natural history and how a disease develops compared to an intervention such as a gene therapy treatment.
We probably have time for just one more question, so I'm going to go to one from the Q&A. So given that these are rare diseases, the question poser suggests that we need to transcend geographical boundaries. How can advocacy organizations, clinician scientists, and pharma do their part for this endeavor to bring novel treatments to patients across the globe? So that might be a good one for you, Sheila.
Yeah,
Ben.
well, I mean, as an example, when you get later in the stages of development, in order to be able to meet your patient numbers for these rare diseases, by default, they're likely to be studies, clinical trials that take place in multiple countries, because there's just not enough people with that specific genetic variant in for instance, just the United States. And certainly as a pharmaceutical company developing therapies for rare and ultra rare diseases, we're not just looking at this being something that happens stateside. We involve experts and patient voices from all over the world.
Dawn, can I comment?
Of course you can.
Okay, thank you, thank you. I think it's important for all people who are affected, and that includes the family, to be advocates. And we're learning, especially over time, or we have learned, that people who advocate for themselves and speak up in their communities, with regulators, with the health systems, that's the way to get heard and to make change. And I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, but we're slowly moving the needle, at least on regulators and some health systems, about what the needs are for people with these conditions. So I think being your own advocate is really, really important.
I completely agree. And that ties back to advocacy at all levels, from what Joy was talking about, just advocacy for a child who needs accommodations in school. And same thing for Adrian. She needed accommodations. Nobody knew she needed them. She didn't even know she needed them. But she did. So everything kind of always goes back to advocacy. I think we had a great symposium today. We started out learning a little bit about genes that cause retinal diseases, some of the ways we can look at our genes, some of the symptoms that patients should be aware of that might be a sign that there is an inherited retinal disorder. We had a wonderful but sad story from a patient who was misdiagnosed at first. And I think that is an all too common thing, because inherited retinal disorders in their earliest stages are not easy to diagnose, especially when they affect a child, because children don't necessarily have a frame of reference that something is different. Think about the average child who just becomes nearsighted and they need glasses. They have no idea that they need glasses half the time until you put glasses on them. They go outside, they're like, wow, there are leaves on the trees. So magnify that by 1,000 times for a child with an inherited retinal disorder. So it's imperative that we listen, that we help make sure that children that have these symptoms get to an eye doctor who can either do the testing or get them to a specialist who can. It's imperative that we talk with families so that the families understand what's going on, and that we connect them to resources, both within the school system, within organizations like Foundation Fighting Blindness. Prevent Blindness America has all kinds of resources. So the resources are out there, but people need to know to ask for them. I'm a big proponent of genetic testing, or I don't think I would have been on this this call. I have yet to have a patient say, no, I don't really think I want that. It's a little different for genetic testing for eye conditions than it is for some other type of condition that may impact your ability to keep insurance and things like that. So I think it's for eye conditions, we're in a really wonderful space, that we're in a field that is skyrocketing in terms of the new knowledge that we learn all the time and the new treatments. And I think knowing, going back to my first slide, knowledge is power. I was empowered last year at ARVO, where a number of the researchers that won awards were people who were in the IRD space. And many of them were looking at not only gene-specific therapies, but also gene-agnostic therapies. So I think we're in a time frame of where there's just a world of hope for people in all stages of the natural history of their IRD. So with that, I would like to very much thank all of our panelists, and I'm going to turn it back to Donna.
Would help if I unmuted, sorry. I want to thank all the panelists again, and also thank Dawn, Dr. DiCarlo, for being a great moderator, leading us along, facilitating the questions, and all of your perspective and your great work. I especially want to thank our two patients and mention our Aspect program. Julie Gretzmacher is our director. She's one of the panelists here. She's tucked away, but she's going to put some information in the chat. For those of you who might be patients or work with patients who might be interested in the Aspect program, patients and allies, so it's an engagement program. Just want to share a couple of quick resources. We have at Prevent Blindness, we have a brand new fact sheet and information on Stargardt's disease. We have our inherited retinal disease information in English and Spanish. We have social media messages. We have a Focus on Eye Health interview where we will be posting on our YouTube channel this webinar, as well as the webinar we had last year, which I'm calling our 101 on inherited retinal diseases. So I hope you will review all these resources and use them and share them with families, give us input into what would be helpful for you as you're educating families. I know we've got a lot of people here who are school nurses or work in early childhood, work with children and families with IRDs and other vision disorders. So we are really happy to be able to share these resources with you. So I just want to thank everyone. I really want to thank Johnson & Johnson again. We're so happy to have Dr. Hickson Curran here representing J&J and for sponsoring this webinar. We are so appreciative. Visit us at preventblindness.org and at our National Center for Children's Vision at nationalcenter.preventblindness.org. So thank you all so much for joining today. I hope you learned something, and I hope you learned something that you can take and provide service to the families and children that we work with so closely. Thank you for all you do. Have a great day, everybody.